I read 25 things in August out of my goal of 31. I knew that was a long shot. My realistic goal was actually 15, so to hit 25 is actually really good. First, I'm going to start with the audiobooks that I listened to. The first thing I listened to was Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and this was a great concept for a book. It is set in a coffee shop where one chair at this certain table sends you back in time. I just found like the execution of this book lacking. I felt like it would have worked a lot better as a play, but this book was still really unique and it was a lot of fun. Just a cute little interesting sci-fi story. Then I listened to 2 short stories by John Gaspard, and these were very interesting. They were The Invisible Assistant and The Last Customer. So these were actually a surprise. I found these on my aunt's Audible account. She lets me use her Audible account. Thank you, Aunt Sherry. And I just kind of listened to random stuff on there that she listens to. And these I picked up because they were pretty short and they were a lot more entertaining than I expected them to be. These books are little snippets of a larger series. You don't have to know the whole story to read these books, but it follows a retired magician detective or a retired detective magician. I think if you're a little nervous about a long series of books, if you can find like these little short stories that are independent from the overall story, this is a good way to get a taste of how that author writes and what those stories are about. And these little short stories really made me interested in the overall series, which I will one day be checking out. The next audiobook I listened to was The Greatest Beer Run Ever. So basically this is when the Vietnam War is happening. People are protesting the war, people are protesting the soldiers, like nothing's fun, nothing is a good time. Chick, our main guy, the writer of the story, is at a bar in his neighborhood and the bartender says that he wishes that the soldiers over there had a beer. And Chick is just like, I'll do it. Like, I'll take the beer over there. And he's a retired Marine, he's already served, but he decides to make a beer run. The way it all adds up and lines up and works out is pretty wild, and if it's true, like, this is one of the craziest stories I've ever read. The next audiobook I listened to was The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. I did not particularly like this book. I thought it was bad. I didn't get anything from this book other than the fact that the author knows a lot of CEOs and works with them and helps them be successful and stuff like that. I didn't like this one at all, and I don't want to waste any more time on it. The next book I listened to was Songteller, My Life in Lyrics by Dolly Parton. I love this. This is basically just one long interview about a bunch of different songs that Dolly Parton has written throughout her career, and I'll just let Dolly say for herself,
I just like horny songs.
The next audiobook I listened to was Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford, and this book was unexpected. I didn't know what I was getting into when I started this one. Again, this was just an Audible book that my aunt had listened to, and I saw it and I was intrigued, and so I clicked it. It was just so strange. Like, I can't even explain to you the plot of the book coherently, but I definitely enjoyed the way it was written. I really liked the narration of the audiobook. I do feel like it's in acquired taste. I don't think everyone would like this book. I think there are topics in it that are strange. The main character basically isn't human, and so I think you have to really keep that in mind. Like, she's something that was grown out of the earth, if I'm not mistaken. And so was her father, and her father, I guess, raised her. They do weird, like, magical healing things, and they have these special abilities, and they're kind of like outcasts in the town, but people also go to them for a lot of things because they need their help. It gets really weird, and it's interestingly written. It's kind of gross, but it's really pretty at the same time. The language is just really unique and cool, and I haven't read anything quite like this before. Then I listened to The New One by Mike Birbiglia, and I loved this. This is about him becoming a parent with his wife, and he never wanted to be a parent. He never wanted to be a dad. He didn't want to have kids, and basically his wife decides she wants one. It's just like a really cool, realistic, honest portrayal of a dad who doesn't really want to become a dad. It's a lot of fun. I found it to be hilarious. A couple of my friends didn't like his humor in this one. I would much rather hear his honest feelings about being a parent than some made up fluffy crap about how wonderful being a father is, if that's not how he really feels. Then I read How to Pronounce Knife. This was an audiobook as well, and it's a collection of short stories. The only thing I'll say about this book is that I feel like we didn't get enough time with a lot of the characters in the story, so it didn't give me, number one, enough time to really remember the characters after I finished their story. I only kind of felt with them in the moment, which might have been the point. But once the story was finished and I moved on to the next story, story. My brain was already like gone from the last set of characters. And sometimes it's just like that with short stories, but with this one, I really felt like I wanted more time with the characters. The last audiobook I listened to in August was Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, and I really like the sound of his voice. I think he thinks he's very wise, and he does have like a ton of really cool experiences that I think are worth listening to, but it is really difficult to listen to him talk about, like, at one point in his career, he's like so rich and famous at this point. He turns down a $14 million deal to do 2 months worth of work for a romantic comedy. And he doesn't want to do it because he's just not feeling it. Honestly, I get it. Like, if you're that rich and you can afford, to say no to $14 million for only 2 months worth of work, and like you think it affects your artistic integrity, you don't think you want to be that rom-com guy anymore, so you have to say no because you want to become more serious, which he did, because then he goes on to do Dallas Buyers Club and whatever else. But it is just so hard to listen to someone turn down $14 million because they don't feel like it. I don't know, I get it, but at the same time, like, my soul hurts. These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This book's amazing. I immediately went to my library website to check out the second book, and then I realized it wasn't out yet, and I was very disappointed. It's a fun take on Romeo and Juliet set in Shanghai. I highly recommend it. Even though it's based on Romeo and Juliet, it's still very unique, and it's definitely its own thing. Then I tried out Hannah Witton's For the Wolf, and this one is actually a DNF for me. I stopped reading this around 60-ish%. I hated it. I was expecting something so different from what I got. Based on the cover, I thought it was going to be some type of Red Riding Hood retelling or some kind of, interpretation, but it ended up being a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and that's just not what I was in the mood for. I had already read one of those very recently, and so this just wasn't what I was looking for. I wasn't entertained. Like, all the magic and stuff was very confusing. The story it didn't feel compelling enough to me to keep going. I shut the book as soon as I realized, like, all the effort I was putting into trying to like it just wasn't worth it. Sky Hunter by Marie Lu. I thought this was so good. Marie Lu is like an automatic pickup for me. If she comes out with something, I'm gonna read it. She's just like a comfort young adult sci-fi dystopian type author for me, and I think for a lot of people. So if you like Marie Lu, or if you're interested in Marie Lu, I recommend this book. I think it's really good. I read the first 3 installments of Vampire Knight, and this is my very first manga series, and it is interesting. At this point of filming, I am actually through volume 8, and there is just some weird stuff going on at this point. Like, not only am I a little lost, but like there's just some stuff that I can't spoil. Let's just say the first 3 are very interesting and a lot of fun, and I like the foundation. And where I'm at now, I'm a little confused. Speak by Laurie Anderson. This was the graphic novel version, and this was so good. I loved it. I recommend this book to anybody. Watchmen by Alan Moore. I have to say, I did not like this book. This is a very popular comic book graphic novel. I'm not too confident on my definitions there, but I'm pretty sure you would call this a comic book. I did not like the art style. I didn't like the way the pages were crammed with words. It was so intense. It's also one of those, like, at the top of every list when people say, if you're gonna start reading comics, like, this is the one you should start with. And so that's why I checked it out, and I did not like it. One Last Stop, I read this, and it was so good. This is one of my most anticipated reads of the year because I loved Red, White, and Royal Blue so much, and this did not disappoint. The Queen's Gambit. This book is great, but the show's also great, so if you've already watched the show, you don't need to read the book, and if you read the book, I recommend the show because the show just adds a little bit more to it. Book 1 of The Old Guard. I read this after watching the movie, and it's an interesting concept about like these immortal vigilante type people. I think people might like the movie a little bit more than they like the book. Compulsory by Martha Wells. This is another one of those little short snippet stories from a larger series. I actually read this online. It takes less than 5 minutes, and it's a really good little quick intro into the series. The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. You don't have to know anything about the Grishaverse going into this. Just know that it is like a world where magic exists and people have powers and stuff like that. I read this arc called For the Love of Friends, and this is basically just a story of a woman who says yes to being in like 5 weddings within like a month of each other or something like that. Books like these always tend to follow a formula and they become very predictable, and I was hoping this one would be a little bit different than what I expected, and it ended up being just like any other story that tells this exact same plot. A woman agrees to be in a bunch of friends' weddings all at once and stuff happens. Basically with this one, she starts a blog where she like anonymously complains about the different weddings that she's in. And then of course it all comes out and the fallout happens and blah blah blah. Like you know exactly what happens. As soon as you say like she writes an anonymous blog, like you know eventually what's going to happen with the story. And finally I read Per My Last Email, which is basically just a fun little book to try to like spice up your work life, but in a fun way, not a weird way. Instead of like your routine greetings and your routine email signatures and your out of office messages, it just provides you with like new and fun and old ways of saying the same things that we already say, but just in a funnier, more interesting way. The only thing I would change about this book is that I would like pronunciation guides, because that was the only thing preventing me from using some of the words. So those are all the books I read in August of this year. Bye!